everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Colin McFader, joined as always by Clark Coffey. And today we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different for episode 28. We are going to be, as opposed to what we usually do, which we've been doing recently, which is kind of going through Herzog's filmography. One thing that I realized the last time we recorded was that we were always kind of talking about like personal anecdotes about whether it's like our careers or our lives or kind of how we got into movies and things like that. And I just thought, might be a cool idea to just do an episode where we don't necessarily focus on a movie or we don't focus on the masterclass, but rather we just kind of focus on, our careers, and we kind of just talk a little bit about and ask questions to each other about
a little more personal, if you will.
Exactly. And where our love for film came from and stuff like that.
Right. And of course, it'll kind of will weave in, how we came to discover Herzog and his, films and his kind of philosophy of filmmaking, which obviously has impacted us. But yeah, this will be kind of a little more freeform and personal, if you will. It's like maybe we could consider this like a special episode.
Yes. Yeah. Subscribers only. For the $0 fee.
Exactly. Right. For all of you who've contributed so much, this is your extra special.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I guess, without further ado, why don't you just kind of take us off and where did you, get your love for film? Where did it come from for you?
So, yeah, I mean, interesting question. I it's always fun for me. I think, I have had this conversation with so many people. It's fun to hear other stories about how they kind of fell in love with film. So I'm excited to hear yours. But for me, I mean, basically when I was a kid, probably, 5, 6, 7-ish years old, I remember that my parents used to maybe once a month or something, invite their friends over and they would have movie nights at our house. And I just, for whatever reason, it's just what they loved. They would always get these the genre flicks, like cheesy horror movies, I mean, at the time in the 80s, it would have been like even stuff like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, I remember they would rent. And, this is kind of at the beginning of VHS, being able to rent VHS movies, right? There was no Blockbuster, but there were independent video stores. And so my dad would go out and rent, Friday the 13th or whatever, slasher movies, genre flicks, and invite friends over and they would watch. So, well, of course, they made me go away up to my room. Like, I'm not watching this stuff. But of course, it's like I can hear them laughing and I can hear like they're having all this fun and I can hear the screams and the sound effects and everything and the intense music, coming up the stairs into my room. So, of course, I'm going to sneak down. And I remember very specifically, I would sneak like halfway down the stairs, and there was like this mirror on the hallway that if I kind of snuck halfway down the stairs, I could look at the TV in the mirror. And this is like great. Back in the days, yes, I'm going to date myself, I'm old, but this is back in the days when, I think we might have had a 25 or 27-inch TV, so right. You can imagine.
And that's what I grew up with too.
Yeah,
so not too dated, yeah.
So it's like you can imagine, I'm like on the other end of the house, like watching it through a mirror. So it's, it's like
big.
A postage stamp, basically, But it was just, because it was kind of, I could see everybody having so much fun and it was kind of taboo. I mean, that's, that kind of really got me interested. So, through this process, one of the films that my dad rented and my parents watched with their friends was Mad Max, the original Mad Max. Mm-hmm. And I somehow, it was still around the house. They hadn't taken it back yet. And I, snuck back, maybe it was like after my parents had gone to bed or maybe they were working or distracted. I don't remember. But I popped the tape in and I remember watching Mad Max for the first time. And I was absolutely, positively, completely and totally just blown away. Like just totally blown away. Mm-hmm. And the Road Warrior as well. And those are like two of the films that really in my earliest years had, some of the biggest impact on me. So Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, and Mad Max. But also, this is, I grew up in an era of, the original Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the original Star Wars films. So these were kind of huge for me. Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, so a lot of Spielberg, a lot of Lucas, George Miller, like I said, with Road Warrior and Mad Max. But yeah, I mean, really, it was these like combination of kind of the very first kind of wave of what would be, of blockbuster films, E.T., Jaws, Close Encounters, Star Wars. But then like these grindhouse kind of genre flicks. I mean, Mad Max and Road Warrior were genre flicks back then. They were, matter of fact, Mad Max was released in the States, I think, after the Road Warrior was released, because Road Warrior was kind of, had more popularity, got more traction.
It was kind of like
in the
almost
US.
like a
Yeah.
comeback almost, if you can.
And I remember
that way,
even like I remember for the longest time when I would watch Mad Max, it was dubbed. So Mel Gibson was dubbed over because the distributor thought that Americans wouldn't be able to understand Australian accents. So it was even dubbed. So it's like this bad VHS dub. But I watched The Road Warrior so many times as a kid that my dad would have to keep going back to the store to rent it. This is what, before you could really buy, you couldn't buy VHS tapes for home. And if you owned a rental store, it would cost, a VHS copy of a movie might cost, $500, $600, $700, $800 or more, because at that time the studios thought that it was a threat for people to be able to actually own movies. This is before studios kind of was like DVDs and like, oh, hey, this is actually a big revenue stream. So they really weren't priced for end consumers. The guy at the store gave us the tape. My dad rented it so many times. He literally gave us.
He basically probably paid off the price of it. Yeah.
But I don't know. At least that's the story. That's what my dad tells me.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably seen that movie 200 times. Seriously, because you know how it is as a kid. You watch the same thing over and over. So this was kind of like my first, I was so spellbound just as an audience member. It wasn't until many, many years later, and we can kind of talk about that process after you tell me kind of your first, impact that film had on you in the beginning. But it was years later before I had an idea that it was something I could do, that this was like something that people actually, that there was this whole profession and this industry, but in the beginning, it was just, oh my gosh, my mind is blown. I am so spellbound, and just, this is the most magical, amazing thing. I didn't even probably think it was like real human beings doing this stuff. You know what I mean? It was magic. It was just magic to me. So yeah, what about you, man?
I mean, it's funny for me. I have like 3 really specific movies that kind of shaped it. And they were all movies that I watched when I was really young, arguably too young to probably see them.
Yeah, like me too. I feel like yeah.
But the first one really, I think, was Rear Window.
Okay.
And my dad was always a big Hitchcock fan, and so
much more highbrow than my exposure. Yeah.
But they're both great in their own right. But I remember, I think what's funny to me about watching Rear Window when I was probably 5 or 6 is that it wasn't dated to me because that was the only scary thing I'd ever seen.
Okay.
So like, it wasn't like I was watching something from the 50s. It felt like it was contemporary, and that this was just what horror movies were.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really watching it through a lens of like, this is an old movie that came out years ago. I was watching it from this lens that like, this was contemporary. This was, now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, it's so interesting. I just want to capture this thought. I had that experience too with films like the 1953 War of the Worlds. That was another film that you sparked this memory. It was like, that was also a film that I was just in love with as a kid, and I would rent all the time, and I was fascinated by it. And you're right. It's like when I was a kid, I really didn't have a concept of like, this is dated.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just like, oh, this is a cool world that they put into this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember specifically the feeling of like not really being able to explain it. Like, I was definitely too young to put it into words, but this idea that I was finished watching the movie, the TV was off, and yet it still affected me. Like, I still didn't want to look out the window at night out of fear that my neighbor was going to be burying their wife. And it was like, why is that happening? Why? So it was this, again, I couldn't really explain to myself. I didn't understand the idea of like, a subconscious imprint on me or something then. But it definitely, like, it was something that stuck with me. And the second that I can think of was really Jaws, which was, like, I have this visceral memory of, and that was, I would say that Jaws for a kid is scarier than Rear Window to me. And I remember being frightened to
This
even
is so
get
much
out
more
of bed.
visceral.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and bloody, and it's
Yeah.
more violent. And I remember being too scared to get out of bed at night to even go get water because I thought that I was gonna like slip into the ocean and that like my
Wow.
bed was gonna be
Now,
a boat.
can I ask how, because so you and I are a generation apart.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember watching Jaws as a kid, but of course Jaws, came out. When did it come out? You know the date.
75. Yeah.
75. So okay, so it came out a year before I was born. So, I probably saw it in the very early 80s, right?
Mhm.
So it was still a relatively fresh film. I mean, I remember having Jaws poster on my wall, a huge
Right,
movie,
right.
but for you, that movie was old by the time you saw it. But how
Yeah,
old
but I
were
mean,
you?
again, it was the same thing. So I would have been 6 or 7. It was actually a
Okay.
neighbor, one of my friends that lived on my street. His dad had it and like showed me, and I remember my mom being quite angry that that we were seeing this like scary, violent movie.
Yeah.
But it was yeah. So I was probably 5 or 6 or 7, like probably 6 or 7, and I just remember this again, that this like intense feeling of why am I afraid to get out of bed and like slip into water if the movie's
Yeah.
done?
Yeah.
And so it really like that initially kind of sparked this thing about like scaring people for me. But I still didn't know how movies were made. It was still then something that was very much like it was like reading a book. Like you don't really think when you're young about like the person that wrote it. You just kind
Yeah.
of
You're just
assume that it's a thing.
absorbed in the story. Yeah.
Or you think it's real, like, or you think that this is
Yeah.
a real event, and that you're just watching kind of real life. But I remember the movie that I think transformed those things from being just things that affected me to me making films was around the same time. I was probably, again, maybe a year after I saw Jaws. I was probably 8 years old, and I saw Jurassic Park.
Hmm.
And it was the first time that I had access to the behind the scenes of a movie. And so I watched Jurassic Park and then finished it and then immediately watched all of the making of. And then I
Hmm.
watched the making of again, and I probably watched the making of more than I actually watched the movie. Like I probably watched the behind the scenes of Jurassic Park like 18 times and watched the movie maybe 5 times. Not now, of course, I've seen it much more than that. But when I was a kid, like I was always watching the behind the scenes, and I remember specifically the moment when, that big T-Rex breakout scene in the rain and seeing them having to pat down the T-Rex, and I was like, this is so cool that that's a machine. And I was really into Lego as a kid. And so what I started doing was basically doing that on small scales. Like I'd build a Lego T-Rex and I'd see, I kind of understood weirdly enough from an early age that it was like, if I need the foot to come down in the camera, I don't need the whole T-Rex. I just need to build a big foot because it's fake, that's movie making. So I can just
Yeah.
build a foot and I can have the foot come in and I don't have to worry about the rest of the T-Rex. And so that was when I started really making movies, was pretty much stop motion Lego movies. And Star Wars, of course, too. I mean, every kid, sees Star Wars as
Yeah.
a young child and kind of falls in love with it. And so there was very much a big, but that was what's funny too, is that I grew up when the prequels were coming out. I was born in 98. So
Right.
I was growing up literally as the prequels came out, and all my friends really liked the prequels, but I was always in love with the originals. And the reason that I was always in love with the originals and didn't really care for the prequels, even though I was seeing them in theaters and they were coming out as I was, growing up, was because there was no like really interesting behind the scenes stuff. I didn't like watching the Star Wars 2 behind the like Attack of the Clones behind the scenes because it was all primarily computer stuff, and I was
Right.
like, I can't do
Yeah.
that.
It's
So
all
when I was
just
watching
blue
the
or
behind the
green. Yeah.
scenes for Empire Strikes
So this
Back,
is
I was like,
interesting.
I can go outside to
I wanna-
snow and
Yeah,
yeah.
I think you've like touched on something that's like really interesting to me, because it's a big difference in how you and I were exposed to cinema in the beginning of our lives, and it's
Mhm.
curious. I want to explore this. So when I was a kid, that was pre DVD, and obviously VHS tapes did not have special features.
Mhm.
There were, so my exposure to EPK, electronic press kits or BTS behind the scenes stuff or making of, I mean, was extremely limited. I mean, I don't know that I was exposed to any, frankly. I mean, maybe at most like a promo on TV, maybe.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I didn't have any access to that. And it's interesting that was an important part of your kind of moving from, okay, there's like this thing that's magic that's happening on the screen, and it's affecting me emotionally, where you were like, oh wait, but people make this. I can see this is there's like an art here, there's a craft here, and people
Mhm.
do this, and I can do it too. And it sounds like what you're saying is that those behind the scenes featurettes were an important part of your kind of realization of, hey, I can do this. Like, this is just people doing stuff, making, make it cool, and you just started working on your Legos. I feel like for me, I didn't even, especially when you're young, you don't understand there's a director, there's a cinematographer, there's, mostly it's just, you just see what's on screen, right? So you're just looking at what's on screen. And so usually it's the actors that are most prominent to you. It's like, okay, those are the people who are making a movie, because that's the people that you see. So that was important to me, as I'll kind of share, because that's where I first kind of started moving into when I was pursuing a career in filmmaking, was acting.
Right.
But
yeah.
I could say that, it was really Spielberg and his extraordinary just popularity amongst lay people. I mean, everybody knew, Spielberg for me was the first person that I recognized to be a director.
He's like the Mozart of movies. Is the
It
way
was
I would
just
describe
like
it. That like you could ask anybody anywhere,
right.
and they'd know him. Yeah,
And they know, if you don't even care about classical music, you like Mozart or Beethoven. It's like everybody in the world knows who Mozart and Beethoven is, even if they, but you're right. I mean, name a film director, and likely if, nobody knows anything about film, they'll say Spielberg. So that was, and I was a kid when he was really coming into the height of his, popularity and success with Jaws and Close Encounters, and E.T. was huge. I mean, I remember seeing E.T. in the theater. I probably saw it myself 5 times. Indiana Jones flicks. So that was the first time, and just because he was just everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was so moved by so many of his films. I mean, E.T. was a huge impact on me. I remember seeing that at the theater, and just being like, it was a profound experience for me as a kid. So that was the first kind of, hey, wait, there's kind of like a person who orchestrates this whole thing in some way. But it wasn't until like a lot later that I really started to kind of understand that there's an industry and everything. But yeah, so it's well,
I
cool.
think it's interesting too, because very much like you growing up with that Spielberg thing, arguably, as I was sort of saying before, that like I had, of course, the Star Wars prequels coming out when I was a kid, but they were, not really lauded. But what was
garbage?
On the other side of
they
that,
were,
and
they
kind
were
of,
garbage.
Yeah, exactly. What was kind of on the other side of that, though, for me, which I would say was much more similar to kind of your experience growing up with Spielberg, was Lord of the Rings, which came out right when I was in my youth.
God, I'm old.
And that was there you go. But again, that was another one of those things that had like, I've heard people describe the behind the scenes for Lord of the Rings as basically film schools on their own.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
insane.
That was
I mean,
a huge
like
part for me too, was I had again the behind the scenes. But
yeah.
I think what is so different today, especially with like people who, maybe are growing up today and are really only watching movies from today, is that there's no, or at least there's a much more limited idea of like, if I was 8 years old right now watching the Avengers, I really wouldn't be able to look at that and go, I can do that. But when I was 8 years old, or when I was 5 years old watching Lord of the Rings, and I saw that they were using a miniature, and I was like, hang on, I've got a cardboard box. I can make a small building and then put my camera beside it, and that's my miniature. I can do exactly what they did to
That's
make
an
these
interesting
movies.
point, right? Because in some ways, when I was a kid, it would just be like, of course, all films were made using film, and so that was, of course, outside the range of any average person's ability. It certainly was outside of my range, but it was like just the beginning of, I remember being very young, and my dad was kind of, he worked in the for JVC for a while, and so he worked in the consumer electronics industry, and so we, were early adapters to VCRs, we were early adapters to home video cameras, and so I had access to VHS, VHS-C, 8mm, those things growing up. Of course, you'd try your best to make something look cinematic with those cameras, and it was absolutely impossible.
There was a certain charm, though. Honestly,
but
there's a weird charm to them.
There is a weird charm, but it's like now, it's like cameras you can are so accessible. The technology of editing, and that was the other thing, trying to edit back then. So it's like, in a way, it's like so much of the technology of filmmaking is accessible to so much more. You can use a desktop computer, and you have an extraordinarily powerful editing platform. You can go buy some really reasonably priced cameras that, if used well, can give you an extremely professional look. But
Yeah.
yes, but then like a film like Avengers or something like that, I mean, the technology they use there is just beyond, you know.
Well, and that's the irony of it is that so I always describe, when I teach. So I'm 20. I'm almost 23. I'm turning 23 in July. That's so I'm not really all that old. But even when I was a kid, having something like a phone in your pocket that has incredible quality camera, editing software,
Oh yeah, that's mind
lighting
blowing.
software and stuff like that, it was unheard of. That
Oh
didn't
yeah,
that didn't come out until I was in my teens. So I always tell the kids today that I teach that it's like you have really no excuse to not. Every single person has a phone, or most people have phones. Obviously there are some people who don't, but
yeah,
most people have phones with really great cameras. Like even 5-year-old phones have really great cameras. They have access to editing apps. You could literally make an entire movie, and it doesn't have to be high art, but you could
yeah.
as a kid make a whole movie on a cell phone, which is insane to me. But I think that that's exactly what you kind of were hitting on there, which is that the irony though is that while it's so liberated and it's so accessible these days to make movies, the movies that are coming out that are making a lot of money that get the most attention are these $300 million huge
Yeah.
movies that would be impossible to make with that. Whereas I think the difference was, I think one of the reasons there was such a surge of like indie film in the 90s is because that was kind of the sweet spot of movies that were big were still made on not hugely like exorbitant budgets.
Yeah,
There were movies that were
mostly,
coming out
yeah.
that were getting accolades and
There
getting
was there were
brought
still
box
like
office breaks.
there were
Oh, of
still
course,
10,
yeah.
20, 30 million dollar films being made.
Yeah.
And a lot of them. Yeah.
But at the same time, you were getting again this kind of democratization of being able to make movies. So
Yeah.
you had people get VHS, 16 millimeter cameras were becoming more widely available.
Yeah.
So it was kind
It
of
was
to
a
me like
wonderful
that
sweet
that
spot.
90s, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s bit is exactly
Great
it was this
era.
sweet spot
Yeah.
of like you could make a movie for very little money that still had commercial value. Whereas now it's much more difficult. It's easier to make the movie, but to get the commercial value is what's
So it's
the
interesting that
tough
you
part.
mentioned that, because this is the era where, so it took me that long. So also, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Missouri.
Mhm.
My parents aren't particularly artistic. And, so I was not exposed. I didn't live in an area and in a household where, having any kind of artistic pursuit was really kind of seemed like any kind of reality. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
this is something they do in LA and Hollywood. That's, might as well be on another planet to me. Um, I had no role models. There was no, the industry was just totally non-existent. I mean, it was just completely not even a possibility. It wasn't like I thought like, I want to make movies. Darn it, I can't. I didn't even get that far. It was
Yeah.
not, it was just like, I didn't even think about it because it was so far away. But when we did get into the late 80s and early 90s, and you had things like Kevin Smith and Clerks, and we have Quentin Tarantino with
Robert
Reservoir Dogs,
Rodriguez and
and we have this extraordinary explosion of amazing independent film, that's when I really started like, hey, this actually is something that I could do.
yeah.
This is
Which is, I
actually,
mean, I
yeah,
think that it's funny that you are almost a, evidence of what we're saying, which is that you had this democratization
yeah,
of media, of making media, and I think that's really interesting because I similarly, but not, I grew up in Toronto, which is a pretty big film city.
yeah,
But both of my parents were in business. It wasn't, by no means was I growing up around filmmakers or actors and stuff like that. It was just more of like something that I got a passion for.
right,
And I do think that's really interesting though that I kind of grew up on the tail end of that democratization.
hmm,
My even just I talk to kids today who aren't maybe the kids I teach are 8, maybe I'd say like 7 to 10 years younger than me,
hmm,
and talking to them about how when I was young and when I started my YouTube channel, YouTube was for short films. Like
right,
short films were the big thing on YouTube, and they would get millions of views, and they'd be on the front page.
yeah.
I don't know when the last time I saw a short film on the front page of YouTube is. It's
They're
all
video
music
essays,
videos, or it's
basically.
video essays,
Video
or it's,
essays, and
or it's tech reviews or things like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's or it's just drama, like it's just like weird
Yeah, or
gossip, internet
yeah,
gossip.
yeah. But there's definitely not
telling
like
them that like back in the
narrative.
day,
It's not. Yeah,
oh, exactly. But back in the day, there was, and that's what's
yeah,
so weird to me is that it was like, it was almost like there was this really sweet spot. And I don't think that that's impossible nowadays. I wouldn't be doing this if I thought it was impossible. But it's definitely interesting that how fast it kind of switched from, and even just talking about YouTube specifically, where it was like, it was this place to upload videos to really, it was like the perfect kind of distribution platform that came after this democratization, where now we
yeah.
could make movies. And still in the 90s, of course, it was difficult to get your movie distributed. There was no
Oh,
YouTube. There was really no
yeah.
internet platforms like that. And then suddenly along comes YouTube.
And you're
I can
like,
put my
whoa, now
movie
I have
online.
both pieces. Yeah,
Exactly.
I've
And it
got the
was
equipment to
insane.
make it, and I've got a way to put it in front of
Yeah.
eyeballs and have
And
people see
I
it.
don't
Yeah.
know. I think that'll come back one day. But it's definitely not at its peak right now. It's definitely gone back down to a point where uploading your video to YouTube, unless you already have a pre-established audience or have some way to get it, or the money to get it seen by a lot of people, is
Yeah.
kind of a waste of time.
So it's interesting to me. I want to go back to like the Spielberg influence a little bit, because I think this is really interesting. You and I are 20 years apart, and so he was the biggest name in the business. When I was a kid, with all of his early blockbusters, it's still stand as probably the best films that he's ever made. So it's interesting to me that 20 years later, you're just as inspired by him. I'm curious. So, what films were what films was it? His older films?
Well, yeah.
Was it
So
like his recent films? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, because so the films that he made when I was growing up weren't the ones that I watched, right? So that's like when growing up, it was like Minority Report and War of the Worlds and Munich were kind of the ones that were coming out, as I was growing up. So
okay, so still
not
big,
really the
still
ones
big,
that,
but
yeah, still big, but not necessarily like I didn't see those until I was older, a few years after they'd come out. So it wasn't one of those things where I was going to the theater and watching them. But no, it was for me one of the earliest memories I have of watching movies was my dad covering my eyes as I watched Temple of Doom when the heart was pulled out, things like that. So it was definitely this kind of almost passed on generational thing, even though as we talked about, even though neither of our parents were
but they were fans
artists in the film. Yeah, and even like but pretty casual fans. And I think that what's interesting is kind of how you talk about the idea that Spielberg is so, very much like you were talking kind of about the Avengers thing, where it's like you don't need to speak any language to understand those movies or fall in love with them.
Yeah.
Spielberg is very much kind of like, almost to me, an older version of that, where because he's so well known, because he's so accessible by so many people, but he's not accessible because it's like a lowest common denominator thing. He's accessible because he just made good movies that people liked.
Yeah.
And so I think that to me is really the reason that I think he's got such a multi-generational impact on people. Like that's what's
but those were films that your father was watching, though. So your dad would be watching like Indiana Jones or Jaws, and so you were exposed to those earlier films through your father because he was a fan of the older films, is what it sounds like. Yeah. So it would be like if I had kids, which I haven't, but if I had kids, because I like grew up on those films, I would probably be like watching them, and my kid would be sitting next to me, and then my kid would be like thusly inspired. So yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think it is funny that. And I think this happens a lot, right? I mean, my dad loves movies, but yeah, I mean, as far as I know, he's never had any desire to ever, be a filmmaker. I mean, definitely, there's never been even remotely a sign that was ever something he's interested in. But he definitely loves films, and so I grew up watching so many films with my father, and like spaghetti westerns on Sunday afternoons, and like the whatever the local, in St. Louis, it was KPLR, I think, Channel 11. And they would play spaghetti westerns, like because we only had, especially when I was young. I mean, it was like, if you didn't have cable, and not many people did, although I was lucky enough to have cable on and off, throughout my childhood. My parents would get it for a period of time and then maybe lose it. But so I did have HBO, and I could watch a lot of movies there. But I mean, it's like your options were really limited. We were talking about how many options, how many things vie for your attention today. Back then, I mean, I remember when TV went off at 11 p.m. or midnight or whatever it was. I remember having 3 channels. So it was like you watched what was on. But It's interesting, yeah. I mean, it's fun to me that it's kind of tied to that. It's like I would love film, I think, no matter what. But
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
neat to me though that I have this connection to my father, to my parents, sharing these moments with them. And I think a lot of people who love film have probably had similar experiences. Sounds like you did too.
Yeah, no, I mean, and what I kind of actually want to talk about a little bit too is like the moment that you, or it might not have been a moment, it might have been kind of a more
Process.
transitional thing, a
Yeah.
process of like turning it from a hobby into
Ah.
a career and something that was
Yeah.
like viable to do
Yeah.
for a living.
So that's a really good question. I mean, I think, we might at some point want to talk about this in more episodes and
Hmm.
from a perspective of kind of things that we've learned. And, so there could be a lot there. But I mean, so for me, like I kind of alluded to this earlier, that it was the actors that I first felt an affinity for because they were like what I was watching on camera. So yes, there was this part kind of in the back of my mind that like, oh, there's people like Spielberg that orchestrate these things. But what I kept being exposed to and fascinated by was the actors. Um, and so that was my first kind of foray into it. I found myself being really like just obsessed with this process of acting. Like, how do these people do that? Because like you're moved emotionally by these performances, like there's an intimacy there, right?
Hmm.
At least for me, I felt there was this intimacy there where, wow, they're like having such an impact on me emotionally. And I connected that to the actors mostly at that time. So yeah, I mean, it was a process of, I again, it was like growing up in Missouri. I went to college and studied business. I mean, I took as many film classes as they had, but it was just film studies, and there weren't a lot, because
Yeah,
it's
nothing was
just
like practical,
no,
right?
it's not what
Yeah.
they, at least as far as I know, maybe they did, but it just was, again, it was like, you can't, this is not something you can make a living at. This is not something you can have a career at. So you
Hmm.
better go study business because you're going to have to pay the bills whenever you graduate. So again, it was just about the pragmatic. I just didn't see it as a possibility, and but slowly it started. I realized first of all how how much I hated business. And the classes were boring. I didn't like it, and then especially when I got into the real world, I was like hit over the head with like, wow, I really don't like sitting in this office staring at a computer screen,
Yeah.
do like writing ad copy or discussing marketing budgets or whatever the heck I was doing for and I worked for great companies and I was treated very well, better than I should have, frankly, because I got, I got to slacking off quite a bit there near the end. Yeah, but because I did, but so it was almost like, wow, the pain of being in a career that I couldn't stand
Hmm.
really forced me to like, okay, hey, we got to stop here and look at, you got a lot of life left in you. This is miserable. What are we going to do with ourselves?
Hmm.
And so it was a lot of that. It was the pain of doing something that I really was not a good fit for me. And then still, like my love for film growing, my and and literature. I mean, not just film, but theater and literature, just story. My love for story never left, kept growing bigger and bigger. And so basically after college, I was like, that was in the back of my mind, but I hadn't admitted it to myself yet. I was like, I want to live in California. I want to pursue acting. But because nobody around me was a role model for that, I was worried to externalize that idea, and so I never talked about it or did anything externally really. But it started to kind of make changes in my life, and so I didn't move to California right away, but I moved to Colorado. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm halfway there now. From St. Louis to Colorado, I'm like, that's closer, okay. Um, and once I was in Colorado, I started studying acting at the Denver Center for Performing Arts. So I'm like, okay, well, it's not on camera, but hey, it's like I can, after my 9 to 5, I can take classes here, and I can, and so here I am. I mean, at that point, I was probably 25 years old or so, give or take. I could, and I'm taking my first acting classes ever at
Hmm.
stage acting. Um, and it was something I was horrible at. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, or at least I felt like, I'm new at it, so it was like super, like, it's totally interesting, totally scary, meeting awesome people. It was extremely fun. It was also like nerve-wracking to me. It was like even like the exercises that we would do in class would make me like just overwhelmed with anxiety,
Right. Yeah.
So it was like, it wasn't easy to me. It didn't like come naturally. It was like something that was really a challenge for me, but it was something I really enjoyed. So I pursued that end of it. It was really, for the longest time, I was like, I want to be an actor. And then kind of, the more classes I took, and then I started, I auditioned for some theater, some plays out there in Colorado, and then I was actually cast in them, and then, so I'm on stage in front of a paying audience, and, yes, it's small, it's little regional theater, little community theater, but hey, it's paying audience, and I've got a paying gig, and I'm acting, and I'm actually, hey, this is awesome. Small roles, but then that worked into like larger roles, lead roles. Then I even worked into, doing some writing and producing. And then I had an opportunity. So I kind of built like this whole theater world around me. So I had, most of my friends were friends from the theater world. And and then it came to a head for me with my day job. Came to a head where I was so unhappy with that. I got fired, and like, not laid off, I got fired because a combination of just like my attitude sucked, and they didn't want to put up with me anymore. And at the time, of course, I didn't frame it that way. I was like, it's my boss's fault. But looking back, it's pretty clear. I was a turd. So then I was like, okay, well, I'm moving to California now. So I got to California. And this is where I solidified my plan. I'm gonna work this day job kind of thing. That's still working the same type of career, but just for a different company in California. It's like, oh, cool, I'm here. I'm gonna work here for a couple of years. I'm gonna save up my war chest so that I can move to LA to pursue acting. And boom. Then it was like, I've got a plan. I'm doing it. It's a done deal, and that's what I did. I worked for a few years for this company. I saved up as much money as I could, and then I went on out to LA. And then pursued acting with a vengeance. Now, at this point in time, I'm 30 years old and I have no experience. And here I am in LA. I have no experience. I have theater experience. I have theater training. I have acting training, but I have no on-camera experience. I've got no resume that matters to them. Mm-hmm. So that's a tough situation to be in, to be 30 years old, because everybody else in that audition room has most of the people have a heck of a resume. So you're the only guy that doesn't have much of a resume there at 30. So that's where I was like, okay, look, if I want to be able to work in film, then I'm going to have to make my own work. I'm going to have to take on some other positions. So that's where I really started getting into more producing, more writing, directing. I mean, whatever had to be done, if I want to do this, I'm going to have to make my own work. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where I started I started getting experience in all these other different facets of filmmaking. It's like, if I'm going to do this in any capacity, then I'm going to have to make my own work. And so that's how kind of led to me being here now.
That's interesting. So it's funny because we almost have similar but really opposite sides of it. Like,
so what about you?
So for me, I was always into the filmmaking. Like, I was, ever since I started making, as I said earlier, those stop motion movies, I wanted to be a director. That was my goal. I would, going through elementary school, was making movies and directing friends and stuff like that on the old like VHS cameras and stuff that we had, the tape. But I honestly don't really remember how. But I just somehow kind of got into acting when I was young. I never wanted to be an actor, but I remember I did, the Second City is a big theater company here in Toronto.
Sure,
and it's also, there's Chicago locations, all that. And
some
huge people have been there. And so I did improv at Second City, and then I did improv at another improv theater called Bad Dog Theater. And this was when I was probably in grade 4.
Oh, wow.
But I remember
you're young.
doing it really, not to like toot my own horn, but I remember, being so fascinated with it and really liking it so much that I would be invited to the adult shows.
Mm-hmm.
So like even though I was a student, they would take kind of like the two students who seemed to be like, you know, kind of getting it and going along, yes-anding the best, I guess you could say. And
right. Oh yeah, I remember
and
all
they would
that.
say, you know, do you want to come to perform on one of our like performance nights with all the adult cast and in front of, you know, a real audience.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And then but again, all through that time, I still I liked acting, but it was never I never wanted to make a career out of it. It was more just something that I enjoyed doing, and I figured, if anything, it's just a helpful skill to learn, if I want to be a director, to learn acting. And so I wound up going to an arts high school here in the GTA, Greater Toronto area, and I went there for drama. They didn't have a film program. There was another arts high school further away from me that had a film program, but it also had a worse reputation. So I went for this drama program. So it was basically doing, you know, really intensive theater every single day for 4 years straight, which was great. You know, that was like the professionals that I got to work with and stuff, and we were honestly, it's quite incredible. Like the school musicals and the school plays had like budgets of like $70,000 and stuff. Like they were huge. And so you really got this experience, this full theater experience of like when I was, and I also got a lot of behind the scenes. So my first 2 years there, I primarily worked on the tech crew. I was kind of the sound operator for mics and operated the soundboard. And then I started getting into doing stuff on stage in the musicals and the plays. But you really got, like, you know, I got the experience of climbing up to the catwalks and adjusting lights. I got the experience of running light boards. I got the experience of writing professional soundboards and using professional mics. I got the experience of being mic'd, sitting in the makeup chair, performing in front of an audience of 1,000 people.
It's such good experience, isn't it? I mean, I really cherish my theater experience.
Yeah, no, and
I really do.
And if you want to talk about, you know, even just that whole problem solving thing, like amount of problem solving you got to do when someone messes up in front of an audience is huge.
Believe me, I know that from there is nothing more nerve-wracking. Oh, okay, so it's funny. When I was an actor, I thought there would be nothing more nerve-wracking than you know, when I'm waiting in the wings and I'm about to go out and, you know, all these things are flashing. You know, it's like at the time I didn't have a repeatable, solid process, an acting process that worked for me. I was still very much trying to piece that together through my experience and study. So it was a really nerve-wracking experience to me, and I didn't have great ways to handle that. Now, then when I went out on stage, I was usually okay. But I thought that nothing could be more nerve-wracking than that, and I was wrong the first time I directed an ensemble cast. Being the director on opening night, sitting in the front row, watching your actors.
Because you have no control then. Jeez,
that was more nerve-wracking.
I can imagine. And what's so interesting to me about that too was that I didn't, like, it wasn't a situation where, even though there was no film program at this school, I didn't, you know, I sort of like stopped doing film for 4 years and then got back into it when I graduated. And it was very much, I sort of learned that I had to make my own opportunities. So there was like a media class where you did like 2 weeks of filmmaking, but the teacher that I had for that class he grew up in Southern California, and he'd done a lot of work. He worked on things with, who's Bill in Kill Bill? What's his name?
Carradine.
David Carradine. He worked on things like, you know, kind of B movies with David Carradine and stuff.
Yeah.
So he was really into movies. Like, he loved movies, and he would always kind of joke about the fact that it was like, if it was up to him, this media course would just be filmmaking. It wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to do the Photoshop. You wouldn't, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember, was a huge influence on me and a good friend of mine who I'm still good friends with, and who's working on this feature that I'm working on now with me, where it was like, we were doing this 2-week film project in this media class, and he like gave us the whole studio and like brought in smoke machines and lights for us, because he saw how interested we were in doing it. So like all the other groups would just kind of go outside and film things on their phones, but we were like doing like sound stages and building props and stuff. And it was this tiny 2-week project, but that was sort of really when I started to get involved in film at the school. And one of the things that my school always did every year was this holiday video. And so it was like this big kind of like jokey sketch comedy thing where it was like all the teachers would do a sketch. All the departments would do a sketch, and then it would be edited together. And then at the beginning of the holiday assembly, which was like right before we went on winter break, they would show this video, and they were usually like 10 minutes long. It was really stupid, not very well made. Like, it was usually just someone with, again, their phone kind of filming these dumb sketches, but it was a fun thing.
Yeah.
And then so when I was in grade 10, this guy Sam Colder, who also went to my school, who's like this big Instagram, YouTube star now, he's got like 1 million subscribers. He basically invented like the travel video on YouTube, which is kind of neat. But so I went to high school with him, and he did this music. He turned it into a music video, which was "What Does the Fox Say?" And and he did this, like, it was like this insane thing. He had like jibs and dollies and sliders and like full lighting setups and smoke machines, and it was like, it really kind of changed the whole holiday video thing. It made it this bigger thing. And so then I was asked to do it the next year because he'd graduated, and it wasn't very good. My first one wasn't very good. It was a music video, and so we just kind of did this. Me and my friend did it, and then the year after that, when I was in grade 12, I sort of talked to the teacher that was kind of the organizer of it, and sort of said, "Hey, like, I know this sounds weird, but we've got a pretty good working relationship. Can I have complete creative control on this? Like, can I do whatever I want?" And she sort of said, "Yeah, as long as it's appropriate, go ahead." And so we were like, everyone's expecting a music video.
Oh.
Let's advertise it as a music video. Let's tell everyone it's a music video, but let's do this like half an hour zenith of movie parodies. And so we did this, like, it was this huge production. It was the first time that I'd ever gotten the experience of like having to schedule things, having to work with huge casts of like multiple teachers, not just doing like silly sketches, but recreating scenes from Jurassic Park or Star Wars or Indiana Jones or The Godfather or whatever, Sunset Boulevard. And
nice.
It was like, so, and it also taught me so much because I was parodying these big movies. So I was like going in and studying these scenes shot to shot,
recreate,
and going, like, how do I light this shot? How do I move the camera? I built dollies, I built jibs, I built things like that, so we could really like recreate all of the camera effects and all the camera movements and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like, I still think, to me, it's like probably one of the happiest moments of my life was sitting in the audience, watching that on a big screen, and just having people like in like applause and laughter and stuff like that. And it was this really, you know, even though I'd been making movies for so long before that, that was kind of the moment when I was sitting there and I sort of went, this is what it feels like to kind of have it be seen, but also have a production go well and have an end result and have this, like, you know,
it's a powerful
6-month-long
experience.
thing.
I mean, there's a couple really interesting things that you mentioned. I mean, one, that you mentioned that it was such a great experience, you know, parodying or, you know, recreating these all these different scenes from these famous films was an important part of your learning process. And I think it is for everybody. And, you know, I think it's a great way to learn. And I think, you know, different people kind of absorb different levels of, but it's like kind of what you're doing when you're really actively watching a film. You're absorbing all of these shots. You're absorbing all the techniques and the grammar of film and storytelling. And it's interesting that you did that, where you were basically, okay, we're going to create a parody of these things, and so I've got to recreate. You know, the better I can recreate these scenes, the better the parody is going to be, right? Because we got, you know. So it's a really wonderful tool to use, and I've done some of that as well in the past for some of my short films and things, and they are really good learning experiences. So it's interesting, that you had that, and it's fun. You know, it's fun.
Well, yeah, and it just I think it teaches you. It's one of the things that I always do again with my students is like shot recreation. Like I'll put a shot on the TV screen in the studio and sort of say, okay, split into 2 groups. I want this lit correctly. I want it at this proper focal length. I want the framing to be proper. And so what it allows them to do is kind of go like, hey, if I was filming a close-up, I'm just going to stick the camera right in front of the person on an 18mm lens, and that's it. Whereas then they start to think about like, okay, how does that change if I go to a 55mm and I light this differently? And that was the same thing for me when I was parodying these scenes, was it's kind of like, I'm no longer thinking about what I would do. I'm learning what the experts would do, and then I can apply that later on to what I would do. And so it was really, again, it was one of those like,
very
things
useful.
that I think prepared me also just on a production level of like having to schedule all these things and, you know, work with all these actors, prepared me immensely for a career in film, because I had never had that experience before. I'd only ever worked with 2 or 3 friends who, you know, were on like a 5-minute movie. Whereas working on this half an hour thing where I had different shoot days, I had locations, I had to contact the cast, basically, who were, of course, all the teachers at the school, but some of them weren't very keen on doing it. And so I had to kind of negotiate with them and kind of be like, we'll get this done as soon as possible. You show up now. We'll get, we'll be set up before you come. You just have to come, sit in that chair, do a line, and then you're done. And it was like this really great experience in terms of the business side of film, and not
at least
just
a taste of
side.
it. Well, I think
exactly,
something else. It sounds like something else important happened to you there. Was that was that the first time that you had ever sat in an audience or with an audience watching people react to your work? And that was probably maybe the most. I'm going to guess that was at least tied, if not the most important aspect of kind of the impact that had on you and your desire to want to move forward, because that's huge. I was
terrified too. I sat at the back. I couldn't couldn't, and I still do this whenever I watch that I've made. I couldn't bear to think of sitting like in the middle of the audience and having someone behind me watching something that I've made while staring at the back of my head. So I sat at the back of the audience. I was like terrified, but it's one of those things that's so bizarre. It's like an adrenaline rush where it's like you're terrified, but it's like a roller coaster. It feels so good even though you're scared.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's extremely interesting. I mean, I think for all of us, I remember some of the most significant and important moments that kind of inspired me and shaped me were more in the theater world, but the same thing of working hard to put together a play, direct an ensemble. I mean, just all the work that goes into that, and then get to watch a paying audience enjoy it is truly one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. And it's also quite wonderful to be on that stage, and the same thing, and have an audience enjoy it is really a truly wonderful experience. And it propels most of us, I'm sure, to do what we do. I want to talk about here at the end of, because we've kind of not brought this factor into it, but obviously this is a podcast about Werner Herzog and his film, his kind of philosophy film and his filmography. I'm curious about, your story. How did you run into Herzog, his work, and what, obviously it had an impact on you. So I'm curious about, what impact did he have on your work, and what do you take away from his work, and what inspires you about his work?
It's funny. So the first experience I ever had with Herzog was my grandmother bought me Grizzly Man for like my birthday when I was a kid.
Just randomly?
I don't think that she knew what it was.
Just randomly, just like it was in like the DVD bin, and she's like, "Here, it's a bear on the cover." Okay, great. This will be great for kids.
Exactly. And so that's my first memory of Herzog.
Okay.
And then I'd seen his famous ones. I'd seen Nosferatu.
So when did you see those films? Because
when I was probably in high school, about
now, did you see these as part of class? Did your father introduce you to them?
I think it was just a matter of kind of looking for more. I'd seen a lot of like American cinema and blockbusters and all that, and so I think at that point I was just kind of looking for more, something different. And so I was just like, looking for online lists of like who are the most interesting directors, and Herzog was usually on there. So I would start watching those when I was around in high school, but it really wasn't like I would honestly say that I didn't start learning a lot about Herzog until the master class. Until I joined the master class, which of course is where we met. That I remember when I signed up for it. I signed up before it was released. I like got the early thing when it was announced. So it was probably, I think, like 90 days where I had bought it before the class started. And so I was like, okay, in these, 3 months I have before the class starts, I'm just going to try and watch as much Herzog as I could. And so that's kind of what I did. Which really helped with the class. It made the class a lot more, I think, just applicable to me, because I could kind of relate to the things that he'd done before. I mean, that was kind of how I fell into it. Was really like the master class was a huge part of it. But I'd seen his bigger stuff before then. The master class really was kind of, I would say, solidified my.
Okay, and that was that was like what? How many
2016.
Years? Okay, wow, that's like
So
mind blowing to me.
5 years ago now, which is
That's
crazy considering that.
that is
Yeah.
so insane. And that little Masterclass was such a tiny company back then. And I
Yeah.
remember they used to
They had like
always like,
3 classes.
yeah, seriously. And I remember they would always like they let us like lead weekly classes based
Yeah,
off
I
that.
hosted a few of the live stream
Live
things.
classes, and I remember that like they even flew us out there,
Yeah.
and I remember like going out to San Francisco, and I
For the
remember
little
like,
party.
every couple weeks somebody would call and survey me, and of course all of that's gone now, and they're a much bigger company, and
Yeah.
but it was really fun. But yeah, that's hard to believe it's been that long ago. I mean, for me, I honestly cannot remember. I can't remember what the first Herzog film was that I saw. I really don't have that recollection. But I remember though when I started to really dig deeper and pay attention to his philosophy of filmmaking, and want to, and go out and read some of his books, and like what's the Paul Cronin, I think, is
Hmm.
there's a couple of books, Herzog on Herzog, and then he kind of updated that for later. Gosh,
Yeah.
the title is escaping me now. It's like something for the perplexed. I can't remember. Anyway,
Yeah. I
Guide
know
for
which
the
one. Yeah.
Perplexed.
Guide for the
I think
Perplexed.
it's
Yeah.
Guide for the Perplexed. So,
Yeah.
but I think it was probably Cave of Forgotten Dreams for me. Again, it wasn't the first Herzog film that I had seen, but I remember I watched that at the recommendation of my acting teacher at the time.
Did you see it in 3D?
I saw it in 3D,
Yeah.
saw it in the theater. Now, again, it's not the first time I knew who Herzog was. I'd
Yeah.
seen other films, but at that point, and it was like where I was at, I was extremely focused on studying acting. I was spending upwards of 8 hours a day just working on my acting chops every day at home, and really getting into a lot of other, like studying story and story structure, and meditating on story, and just consuming as much of that as I could. And of course, the Cave of Forgotten Dreams really spoke to me because it kind of speaks to this how ancient storytelling is a part of the human condition. And I was just in this perfect place where that really had a huge impact on me. And so from there, it's his overall kind of philosophy of filmmaking spoke to me so much, because at that time I was really struggling to kind of fit myself into what I thought the industry wanted me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really painful place to be for me emotionally. And it was such like a voice of authenticity and strength, and his career was such an example of how you can do your thing, and you don't have to fit into somebody else's mold. You actually don't have to conform to this industry. You can do your own thing. So it was this pursuit of this kind of transition of like, okay, I'm trying to make myself be this thing that a casting director is going to want to hire me for, to no, this is about me pursuing my authentic voice. This is about me telling the stories that I want to tell. And it doesn't have anything to do with this whole machine that I was really struggling to kind of work within, or trying to break into.
Yeah, or even just understand. Yeah.
Or just, all of the above. Yeah. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. And so
I think,
yeah.
So just as we kind of leave off here,
Yeah.
I just sort of also want to say, both of us, I think, have some like really exciting projects coming up over the summer, and so you can probably expect that like maybe in the fall we might do kind of like a fall episode to this, where we kind of talk about, what we've been up to.
Totally,
because I think this is a lot of fun. I think that this,
absolutely, yeah. It's like I've got a pretty fun shoot coming up here at the end of the month, and that's going to be exciting. I'll be working alongside a filmmaker that I've known for about 15 years. He actually hired me as an actor for the very first film, for the very first short film I ever shot when I moved out to California. And we've remained friends, and he's got a crew out here in LA. He's gonna fly out, and we're gonna meet up and shoot a bunch of pickups for a feature film that he's getting ready to wrap up on, that I did some assistant editing for So that'll be exciting. I think
Awesome.
I'm going to help direct some of these scenes, so that'll be cool. But I
Yeah.
know you've been working on a feature that you're putting together. You've locked
Yeah,
down
it's
some
the
actors
first,
and
my first,
locations, and yeah,
my first directorial debut. I
your
expect to come out of
debut.
it with
Now
a
wait,
thick
Let
German
me
accent.
clarify. Is this your first directorial debut, or is this just your directorial debut?
This is
Or
my
is it
first. This is my first of many directorial debuts.
Okay, I was just double checking because I'm like, I just
I'll have a
wanted to make
second and then a third.
yeah,
maybe.
exactly. I was just making, it's because wait a minute, is this your fourth debut? I just went, but hey,
Yeah, I gotta clarify that one.
but that'll be awesome. We can,
Yeah.
you'll have to keep us up to date as to how that goes. It looks really cool.
Mhm.
It's exciting. So yeah, well, as COVID, I mean, hey, I just got my first round of the Pfizer vaccine.
Yeah, that's awesome too. Yeah.
Yesterday, and here to report, aside from just a tiny little bit of soreness in the arm, absolutely no side effects whatsoever. I feel great. I'm excited as like more and more people are vaccinated. I'm excited to actually get back out into the world and actually
Yes.
get to shooting and making movies will be really exciting. So
Yeah, with all your new gear.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, Cullen, thanks again for another wonderful episode. It was a blast. I'll look forward to our next episode, and we'll see. I don't know yet exactly what we're going to cover in that. We might go back to cover another film in Herzog's filmography, or who knows, maybe we'll jump to some other discussion or topic. But until then, everybody, thanks for hanging out and listening. We appreciate it. We'll catch you next time.
See you guys.